Oh, all right. Welcome to the Religious Treehouse podcast. I'm your co-host Matthew.
And I'm your other co host, Jody.
Oh, so good to see you. How are you doing today?
I am doing phenomenal. I did the dishes, and that felt like a lot. How are you?
Yeah, dishes are good. Yeah, I got back from Texas, visited your family, which,
Yep.
odd. But it was a good time. And you went to Taylor Swift concert since we've last spoken.
Yes, if we really want to speak about religion, I had a religious experience at the
Oh,
Taylor Swift concert. Florence came out during Florida,
ooh, love Florence.
and all was right with the world. It truly was magical. I had a dazzling night.
Oh, so good. Um, but yeah, to the new people to our podcast, every week we start off with a card reading of sorts, where Jody pulls a card of some random stone, a daily crystal, her box says. Um, and we use that to, try to frame our episode to some degrees of success.
I think this one's actually really good. It's garnet and it says ignite your passion.
Ignite your passion.
Ignite, like the start of something.
Yeah, and if we talk about it, there's some passion in the Adam and Eve story, which is what we're talking about today. So, we're igniting some passion here. We'll see how that comes into play later.
Okay.
But yeah, so we're talking about Genesis 2 and 3. Jody, do you want to give us your summary?
Okay, so garden made. Phenomenal. God's like, we need someone to tend this. And so there's this guy, Adam, and he starts naming all of these things. And then God's like, you need a helper. So he makes Eve. And then Adam and Eve, they're going about their business. Snake slithers up to Eve and he's like, hey, yo, you should eat that unidentified fruit right there.
Mm.
And he's like, okay, Adam, you should also eat it. This may not be like completely accurate, but this is how my mind read it. And then God found out because they were like, oh my gosh, we're naked. We need to hide. And God found out and he was not happy. He was like, why'd you do that? Because he had told them, like, don't eat that. And they were like, but why not? So they did it. And then blame was passed around. And then he was like, y'all gots to go. You can't be here. You did the one thing I asked you not to. It's like Willy Wonka. Willy Wonka told them, don't touch these things. And then all the kids had to leave.
Yeah, I never made the Willy Wonka Garden of Eden comparison before, but you might be onto something there. Um, that's something that's you know throughout this episode. Let's try to like make that comparison. We'll see how that goes because
10-4.
there's something happening there. But yeah, no, that was a fun summary. Enjoyed it, but I think that's if we asked your average person for the summary of the Adam and Eve story, that's what they would give us. So nice.
I aim
Um,
to be average.
Yeah, perfect. But yeah, do we want to get into the details now? Start
I
from the
would
beginning?
love to. Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, we start with because last week we did Genesis 1 through 2 4, the middle of 2 4. So this story actually starts in the middle of 2 4 and goes through the end of chapter 3. Um, and then I think I alluded to this last week, but we actually have two different sources being combined here, where this source is most often considered to be the oldest of the two sources. So we have the Genesis 1 narrative, where, the 7 days of creation, and then probably a few centuries before that, this was made.
Oh,
And because, and you can see similarities between the two. Like, there's, you know, topics that are bridged, but like there's also very clear differences. Like even the order of creation differs. Um, in Genesis 1, we get like the land being created, then the plants being created, then humans being created. We kind of have that flipped in these stories. We have the dry land being created, then humans being created, and then plants being created. And like that, is like one of like the main details that indicate to us that like, okay, there's different authors here. A few others like how God is referred and poetic structure. But most I'd say almost all scholars agree these are two very different scholars or two different authors having two different stories here. And Genesis 2 through 3 likely influenced good parts of Genesis 1. So that's why we see a lot of overlap there. But that's like some, the general boring biographic information
Okay, but that's
of
not
the.
boring. Like, who wrote them? I would love to know who wrote this, who these people were that wrote this, that and how it came to their mind is really something cool to think about.
Yeah. So, like, I will talk about the documentary hypothesis and source criticism stuff some later episode. But Genesis 1 is usually attributed to the priestly source, often called P. And that's generally considered to be like a post-exilic, author. And they're probably the people that, put together the whole Torah, the whole Pentateuch, or at least in that general era. And this author here is generally attributed to the Yahwist or J, who's much earlier. We'll get into that later.
Okay.
But for now, what's important is we've got two different authors here from two different time periods, both getting influence from Mesopotamian traditions as well as some other traditions. But yeah.
So when we dive into the story, that they just start making man. So
Yeah, we've got, what do we start with? In the day that the Lord God made earth and the heavens. Yeah, so this is, that first kind of sentence there kind of indicates like Genesis 1 kind of took that idea in the day. They said, oh, we can't just steal that phrase right off from it. So they have when God began creating in Genesis 1. And we know here no plant was created yet. No rain had been fallen upon the earth. And rain actually doesn't fall on the earth in the story. We see the waters coming up from, waters underground. So there's this ancient idea that there's waters under the earth and they're rising up. And we see that again in the Noah story of the ark, where rain comes down from the firmament above, but also water springs up from below, and that causes the big flood.
Quick thing, and I know
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to use science to prove anything in the Bible, but have you heard about the underwater, like that, not the under earth ocean that's like trapped in crystal?
Isn't that over in like Africa?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like yeah. Have you heard about that?
I've heard of it, but I don't
Sorry,
know
I
much.
just thought that was cool. They said it's like really deep and like they'd have to drill, but there's like an entire ocean's worth of water under the crust.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Interesting. Fun science stuff.
Fun. I always find it really cool, like reading things like this, and then like, oh, that is kind of true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what a fun coinky dink.
Right.
But yes, fertile waters.
Fertile waters. Um, but yeah, I mean we get the creation of the first man, the first human. Right?
Yes.
The thing that doesn't translate over into English super well is that there's this man being created from the dust or the clods of earth, of the ground, and that's the Adamah being created from, or sorry, the Adam being created from the dust of the Adamah. So man and earth are like very very close words in Hebrew, and there's an intentional pun happening there, where the closest thing I could think of, and I can't find this anywhere in like writings, but also I didn't look that hard. But like if I were to translate this, and like we didn't have Adam as like an engraved figure in our head, I would say our first human is named Dustin, and he came from the dust. So like that's the closest like similarity that I can think of.
I love it.
Yeah. And then later in chapter 3, on that same topic, Eve, the word in Hebrew is Hava, and that means like life. So the idea of the first woman being like this giver of life. So I would name her Olivia, or Liv for short. So Adam and Eve, Dustin and Liv, whichever you'd like.
I think I'd prefer a Dustin and Olivia for the rest of this episode.
Yeah, yeah,
Quite frankly, what did Dustin do? When Dustin
yeah,
was made, what happened next?
yeah. So I think that would be a fun way to translate it, but not a way I've seen anyone actually translate it. Um, but also like we don't get Adam as like a proper name really until like for sure chapter 4, which we don't really get to. But and there's some places where it's like probably Adam in like chapter 3. I think in my translation, the first time I translated it as Adam was chapter 2, verse 20. But even that is like not clear that that's like the proper noun Adam. And it's really hard to translate because like the words are so similar. They're so like what are we talking about here? Is this or sorry, I guess I didn't bring this up yet. The word Adam means in Hebrew mankind, humankind, or man. So Adam, which is a very similar word to ground, also is the same word as mankind or man. So differentiating when a proper noun of a name is being used and when we're just talking about the man in general, it's kind of hard to differentiate. So that's why if you look through different translations, I think King James Version is really happy to use Adam everywhere, whereas like NRSV and other translations are more prone to use humankind or a human, and sparingly uses Adam.
Okay. So one may say that then the forefather of man was very grounded.
Oh, funny, haha.
Is that why men yearn for the woods?
Is that what I mean? It could be like we'll go with that if you want. I don't know if I would ever say that I yearn for the woods, speaking as a man. Um, but if we want to make that generalization that men yearn for the woods, okay, cool.
Well, I love to make generalizations, and I just thought it was very cool because, like, especially, and we'll get to this later, but made of dust, return to dust was just the symbolism is very beautiful to me.
Yeah, yeah. No, and we can get to that now, I suppose. Like, I think what's going on there is we have this ancient notion of divine images where you create um, these images that represent deities of some sort, and that'd be made with clay and water often. And you would often breathe into its mouth in order to like represent like the clay like coming to life. Like that's how they would signify this divine image being made. So what we're having here is this like slight differentiation where the deity, the god, is making the human with this clay and water type thing, but instead of breathing through its mouth, it breathes through its nose. So in that sense, like we have another direct echo of Genesis 1, or vice versa. Genesis 1 is directly echoing this, um, where like this divine image is being made by God, where like we have another instance of kind of being made in God's image. And I think that's the idea that's getting across here of, God as this potter type person that's creating human.
Well, I would say he did very well because we all look so unique and beautiful in our own ways.
Yeah.
But it's very crazy to think that this one came before the other one just because, the way it's laid out, like,
Mm.
and the way we read books, we're like, oh, this is the sequence of events.
Yeah.
But no, that's gorgeous because,
Yeah.
God made us in his image.
Right. Right. Um, but
So
yeah, but what was that?
should we get to The apple.
You're skipping so far ahead.
Am I skipping ahead?
So much that we've missed that we
Oh,
still have to talk
sorry.
about. Like you can't get to the apple without like we talk about the trees first. We have the trees, and like the trees are like the central part. They're like okay. So my theory that I cannot figure out, like this is what I know to be true, but like I have not like ever sat down to like prove it yet. Like this is like when I get my PhD, this is like what I want to do my thesis on or my dissertation, all that. I think trees are fundamentally like what binds the Bible together. I think like there's something fundamental about how trees are represented throughout the biblical literature, where like something really, really important is happening with trees. Um, and we see it on the first pages here. Like we've got the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we've got the tree of life, and like just everywhere there's trees. So I think trees are very, very important, and I haven't found a way to like put that together. And there's tons of literature about it that like fascinating. But trees are important. Remember
Yes.
that. We're the religious treehouse. Like, come on,
I mean,
are
in my
important.
last TikTok video talking about political mailers, I was like, they're killing trees. You need to vote.
Yeah,
I get it. Trees are so important, but I hadn't made that connection because you're right. There are a lot of trees.
yeah.
I mean, if we even get into the New Testament, what does a wood come from that a cross is made out of?
Yeah, oh, we're going off on a tangent here. But like in Deuteronomy, I forget the chapter off the top of my head, but in Deuteronomy we have this verse where it says, "Cursed is the man who hangs on a tree," or something along those lines. And the word there, the word for tree is etz, and that's the word also used for wood. We also see this in the story of Esther, where Haman is hung on a tree and all of his sons and stuff are hung or impaled. We'll talk about that in a few weeks, probably. Um, but like, and that was used by a lot of um, like medieval Jews and stuff to like say, no, no, no. And even much before that to say, no, 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 you're Jesus. Like this guy was hung on wood. Like that means he's cursed by God. Christians are like, no, 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 no. That's not what it means. But like that's exactly my point. Like trees like pop up everywhere in the Bible. They're just like so many places, and it's so exciting. Even in the New Testament, which like outside my area of special expertise. But trees, man, trees.
I need to hear more, but I think this could go on for a while. Okay,
Uh,
so the trees. So they're in a garden.
yeah. Okay. Thank you for bringing us back.
They're in a garden. There's many trees, and oh, look at all of these beautiful trees you can eat from, except that one.
Mhm.
Don't eat it.
Right. Correct. And when you read that before you get past it, we know exactly what they're going to do. Like, there's a tree. They say, "Don't eat that." Like, obviously, they're going to eat it. It's like setting up the story.
Called foreshadowing.
Yeah. But I think in chapter 2 we have two trees mentioned first, right? We've got the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that's fairly common throughout cultures around that time period and place. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. No, reverse that. The tree of life. The tree of life is very common around that area time period because, as I just said, trees are very important. What's a little more unique is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The concept of like good and evil and like knowing all things like as like being important through religion and deities and stuff is very common, but like attributing that to a tree is a little more rare. But I think part of the central story that these two chapters are telling is one how humans are maturing into like an adult civilized life, and we see that through the knowledge of good and evil because they're growing up, they're learning things, woohoo! But secondly, it's this explanation of mortality and how we die. So I think those two trees really centralizing the story, and we even see the tree of knowledge being in the center of the garden. Like there's something central about these trees. that are really framing the rest of these stories that I think is really important. Does that track?
Puberty is what I'm getting.
Sure. Yeah. Cool.
Because well, I just it that transition, and there's so many cultures that have like ceremonies where
Mhm.
you transition from this one stage of life into another.
Mhm.
And they at a quinceañera, a woman gets her first heel, and we have uh bat mitzvahs, and oh, what is it, is it confirmation
Mhm.
for the Catholic
Yeah.
Church? Just ceremonies like that. So this kind of feels like another ceremony in a way.
Yeah. No, there's definitely, a very common theme across cultures where like we need to like mark this transition point of like moving away from these liminal spaces into becoming, adults. And that's somewhat what's happening here too, I think. Like we're explaining how humanity has like or more specifically how their people, the people writing this, like how they grew up. Because what the other thing, like we don't really have here per se the the start of humanity. Like this story progresses into Abraham and Isaac and all those people. What we have here, as what most of these origin stories focus on, is the origin of our people. So it's not too important how humanity began, but what's a whole lot more important is how our people began. So we see the formings of that kind of starting here.
Okay. All right.
But yeah,
So we have one person. Adam is alone in this luscious garden. There's these trees, and he gets to name things, and that upsets me.
okay. Tell me more. Why does that upset you?
He got to name everything before woman got there.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Yeah.
that was the job. Like, I don't know why, but I read that and I was like, bummer. Like, I was created the day after things were named.
Mhm.
Mm. So, and then he needed to have a helper. So I noticed in your notes, um, it was not a sense of subordination.
Yeah. So like I think a lot of, I think this verse gets used a lot to say, look, man is supreme, man is first, and then God made this secondary like thing to like be less than that, like is here to serve the man. But I don't think that's what the Hebrew is indicating. It's like the word here. I don't remember off the top of my head. I could look it up. That's not important. Like the word here used for like corresponding helper um, is like sometimes attributed to God. I don't remember in what verses, but like we don't have a sense of subordination. We're like there's just something somewhat equal here. Like we need help. Like it's not good for man to be alone. Like that's the first time in the Bible where we hear something being not good. Um, and some have said that like maybe this is perhaps Adam having problems finding sexual compatibility. I don't find that too, convincing. Uh, where Adam's, looking for all these animals and like, oh, there's nothing is really getting me excited here. I don't think that's what's happening. Some scholars have made that claim, so I don't want to like completely dismiss it.
That is
But we do,
wild.
yeah, like
Like they
it's
were saying, like Adam was in the garden going, I wouldn't hit that. Mm.
yeah. So I think that's a fun thing to think about as like, is this what happened? But I would say most likely no. Something fun to bring up in a conversation such as this, but not something that I would take too seriously.
But yeah, I mean, like, and reading the text, it was like, and they named her woman because she was as man. And I was like, but she had more words added. So did she not then just add to man? It looks like man just came from her.
Right. Okay. So this is a similar thing that's happening, as I mentioned before, with Adam.
Mm.
So in the Hebrew, woman is Isha, and man is ish. So from the ish came isha. So what we have is like a folk etymology. Like I don't think the words are actually etymologically connected,
Mm.
but what we do have is like, hey, we have these two little words here that like are similar. Hey, and it works in English as well. From the woman or from the man came the woman. So it's one of those puns that like also works in English.
Boo. Is all I have to say.
Yeah, but I mean, there's so we're having fun here. Like one of my favorite um, pieces of rabbinic literature. We have Bereshit Rabbah 8. And this is mentioned in other pieces in rabbinic literature as well. But it makes the claim that this Adam first created, the human first created, because I don't think we've gotten to like Adam, like definitely being called Adam yet. So this human being created actually was androgynous, having being both male and female. And what happened here is, because the word often translated as rib, the woman taken from the rib of Adam's, I translate it as side, which I think is much more accurate of a translation. It's often the word is often used as like the side of a ship, which also has ribbing. So like, either one is working, but Bereshit Rabbah 8 says like the man was like split in half, and like now we have the man and the woman. And like that's not rabbinic literature comes from, I don't know exactly when Bereshit Rabbah was made, but this is second through 8th century CE. So way, way, way after this was written. But that's not to say that this idea of being androgynous humans isn't more common. I think, it's either Plato or Aristotle. So, different cultures, Greek, but they also have these ideas of, these, man, 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 woman, woman, woman hybrids kind of working together. So it's not a completely unique idea, but like there is this idea out there that like, oh, man and woman was this first human created, and then when God split the side, that was how it worked. Which is
If I
fun. Another fun thing to talk about.
if I'd known we'd be getting into this, I would have gotten my notes. But I mean, there are just so many cultures who even herald people like that as being more spiritual, to be of both.
Hmm.
It means you have a deeper spiritual connection. And I think that's so beautiful because, people talk about the divine feminine and the divine masculine, especially if you get into like the witchcraftiness. Um, there's both of these entities, and to embody both is to truly be holy.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, no, but I've heard about the, because I've seen this weird cartoon. It was a man head and a woman head, and then they split them in half, and then it was Adam and Eve. And then you get the whole like twin flame thing, like two people. Have you heard about that? Two people who are
No,
actually like, you were created to be together, but you were split apart. And when you find each other again, you're whole, like the whole soulmate
of course. We love a good soulmate.
kind of thing. So I think it's really beautiful to have. So you're saying he just split Adam.
I'm saying that is an interpretation um, put forth, by the, in the common era. A fun thing to bring up. I think it's more likely that that might not be exactly what the author had in mind, but something that had some hold in interpretation for some time.
Okay. All right. So now we have two people in the garden. He has two Sims in his
Yeah.
Garden of Eden.
Mm.
And they're going around, they're doing stuff. They're just like do, 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 living life. A serpent shows up,
Mm.
and he's like, hey, yo, you know that tree he said not to eat from? Right? Is it a serpent? Snake?
Yeah, yeah, serpent,
Okay.
serpent,
A-
snake, same thing.
And serpents weren't always known for like evil, right? I mean, there has to be other interpretations.
Yeah, so what is common around that time period is this idea of, snakes have always been somewhat, associated with immortality, eternal life of some sort, of, health for some reason, rejuvenation, because of the fact that they shed their skin. So the fact that snakes have some connection to immortality of some sort makes sense for the snake to be in this story, with the themes of mortality popping up in the tree of eternal life being there. So like the idea of snakes being associated with health even goes into modern times where we have, what is it, the what's the big health organization where they have like the staff with like the
Uh,
snakes encircling it?
Red Cross.
No.
But I know this staff you're talking
Yeah, you
about.
know what I'm talking about. Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
like this sense of like even now, like the snake has this some sort of sense of, health associated with it.
Yeah.
So there is that, but there is also this sense that like this snake is crafty and sneaky and stuff like that, being posed here, which makes sense given like the later stories of this, like, what is it, verse 14 of chapter 3, um, or 15, where he puts enmity between the offspring of the woman, because like, yeah, snakes bite, animals bite. There's this, some sort of war between humanity and animals that is kind of being accounted for here.
Yeah, but that's not always on the snake's portion because one time Connor kicked a king snake and it bit him and he was like, "Why'd it bite me?" And I'm like, "You kicked it." He was a
Yeah.
child at the time. But I think that's a great example of that enmity.
Yeah, as verse 15 says, he will strike your head and you will strike his heel. Like, it's biblical. It's been prophesied.
It was in the good book, Connor. It had to happen.
Yeah.
Um,
That happened to someone, too bad it happened to your husband.
for a second, I was like, this is just snake, like bad snake PR. This is just snake slander because they're like making this snake. But so when I first read it, I read it as God said, don't eat that, you will die.
Yeah.
And then I read your translation, it said you can die.
Hmm.
So during my first reading, when I was like, oh, they will die, and the snake was like, you won't die, I was like, okay, the snake didn't lie. God did.
Right.
And then your translation.
First of all, never trust my translation. I'm a fool. Um, I disagree with the person who translated my translation, which was me. I think I was wrong there. I think what's much more true to the Hebrew text is, something along the lines of "You will surely die." Um, I think what is actually happening here is either God is lying or God has changed his mind. So it seems like there's, if we translate it as "can die," or I think Robert Alter translated it as "doomed to die." That I think it's an acceptable translation, but I don't think it's, you know the best way to translate it, because that takes into account that, one, God must be telling the truth, which is imparting dogmas and doctrines into the translation, which I don't think is necessarily good. But it is also trying to reconcile the whole story as like, well, they didn't die. Like, obviously they didn't die. But what God was actually saying is they were going to die one day. They've lost their immortality. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think what's happening is God said, "Don't eat this. You're gonna die if you eat it." And then they ate it, and the snake was right, and they didn't die.
I was really vibing when I read it that way the first time. That's what I was vibing with because I was like, okay, well then this shows that there's like this entity is not always completely true.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, so justice for the snake
yeah.
2024. Because he didn't lie. He was like, no, he doesn't want you to eat it because then you'll know as much. And as the snake has not been defined as Satan. That is
Right.
something other people have put on the snake.
Yeah. No, I think that's an important thing to bring up. The earliest indications that we have as people interpreting the snake as Satan is the first century BCE, maybe, but much more prevalent, much more likely with the first century CE, and we see that through Christian interpretations.
Just
So I think it. Go ahead.
you.
Okay. Oh, I think, if we want to read this as, the text, like as the author wrote it, like we can't impart Satan into this. Um, and especially the notions of Satan during the time of this are nothing like what we have it now, and nothing like how we have it in the first century. And when this was written, there might not have even been like this idea of a Satan. We should do an episode on Satan. That would be fun.
Yes, please.
We'll do that sometime in the future.
Sorry, I got really excited because I was like, so we can name the snake. The snake can be named Harold. So Harold is telling Dustin and Olivia to eat this unidentified fruit.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that. We've got the Snake Herald, we've got our man Dustin, and our woman Olivia. Fantastic.
So Harold's like, eat this. And people are always like, oh, it's an apple. I've always imagined it as a pear because
Okay,
pears are sinful, that curvature.
sure.
He's like, eat this pear and you shall know everything that other guy knows. And Olivia's like, okay. And then Dustin's like, okay. Right?
Yeah,
They
yeah.
both agreed. They both ate.
Right,
No
right.
one
So
forced anyone.
let me find the verse. Um, because there's this idea that, you know, the snake was talking only to Eve, and um and that's often used to like place the blame on Eve or Olivia, as we call her. Uh, where is it? When the woman saw the tree was good for food, then the eyes of both were open. Okay, she took the fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband. Oh, I don't like how NRSV translated this. How did I translate it?
Mhm.
Um, that's chapter 3, verse. Sorry for the detour.
Yeah.
Um, and she took from her fruit and ate, and she also gave to her man with her, and he ate. Uh, so there's like that very minute difference that the man with her, the husband with her, also ate it. So there's this indication that the man was there the whole time, but some translations, ancient and modern, have kind of taken that with her out to kind of be like, okay, it's just the woman's fault here.
Okay. Let's say he wasn't with her when she went and got the pear. Let's say he wasn't. That man has been living in this garden for how long? He would know what the fruit looks like, and he would be fully cognizant that that is what he's eating.
Sure, sure.
I just because no, because then we get to God finding them and then being like, oh, don't look at us. We're naked, which is this the birth of shame and self-consciousness? Is my question.
Yeah, no, I think what we have here is kind of like humanity growing up. Like this is what's happening. Um, I think we're often attribute shame and stuff to this, but we just have, this is why we know things. This is why humanity is like God, like gods, because like we have this like knowledge of stuff that makes us similar to God. Yeah, I think this is just kind of, expanding on the idea of being made in God's image. Like we see this in Psalm 8, uh, where the idea that humans are made just lower than God, like just lower than the gods. And the idea that divinity and humanity are so close to each other, and that's why there's so much tension. That's why there's so much tension between humanity and God, because we're so similar, but there's something different there that like causes all this animosity and tension.
Mm, okay. So they're like, don't look at us. We're naked. Don't come near. And he's like, who ate it? Who ate it? Well, Adam comes in And he's like, you gave me woman. Woman gave me fruit. I did nothing wrong. Boy, what do you mean?
Yeah. When I was a kid, it was one of my favorite stories that my parents like to tell me. When I was a kid, I did something wrong. I was put in timeout or something. It was really young. I was like in a crib or something. But young enough to like talk and stuff. And I was angry. I was rah, 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 like in timeout all by myself. And my grandma came in and said, "Who are you talking to?" And I look around and it was the lamp. I was talking to the lamp, and I think that's what's happening here. Like we have this authority figure that we're scared of, and it's like, no, don't be mad at me. Like, blame her. That she's here. Blame her.
And you know what? Blame yourself too while you're at it.
Yeah,
Because you brought her here and now I've eaten the fruit and you're mad at me. Buddy, I didn't do anything wrong. He is dodging accountability left and right. Eve is no better though, because she's like, it was the snake.
yeah,
The snake fed it to you how? Slithered up with it in its mouth and force fed you? No. You made a conscious decision.
yeah.
And so then God is like, humans have become like us.
Right.
And the us is very interesting to me.
Mm. Yeah,
That
we had
that
this last week too. This notion of like a divine council that is likely what the deity is referring to. Like, like God, like turns aside. He's like, oh, guess what? They did the thing that they're not supposed to do. They're becoming like us, and that's what I was getting at. They're like humans are just beneath divinity. There's this idea of and that's where tension comes from. They're like so close, but so far away.
just
Yeah,
a smidge.
yeah. And so then at this point, God's like, all right, so close to us, we can't let them eat from the other tree, like the one that'll make them live forever. Like that's really what makes a god a god. And, yeah, and like that makes sense. Like a deity from that time is something that has special knowledge, perhaps all knowing, perhaps just knowing the important things, but also one that doesn't die. So if humans, did those two things, they'd be way too much like a god. So God's like, nope, can't have that. You got to get out of here.
And if people don't die, then overpopulation is a real issue.
Right. Not a problem I think they were thinking about, but sure, we'll go with that.
They should have been. We need to be, you know what? They ate from the tree. You don't know. They could have been thinking about everything. E
Yeah.
equals MC square was actually born right then, as soon as they ate the pear.
Sure.
Olivia was like, I am Marie Curie, and I don't have the ability to make all the things I want to make, but I could.
Yeah. No, that's
Just the
funny.
idea is limitless. To
Yeah.
eat from this tree and gain all of this, because was it logic they gained? Was it just knowing morals? Like, or
Yeah.
was it just everything?
Yeah. So I think what's happening here is we have the knowledge of good and evil. And I think what's happening is that this is a merism, which means that you're taking two extremes of a pole and that, two extremes and that encompasses everything within it.
Okay.
So, the first example that comes to my head for some reason is, the FBI saying there's a serial killer, saying we've looked on the East Coast, we've looked on the West Coast, like, and that means we've looked everywhere in between. We've looked all throughout America.
Yeah.
So I think the knowledge of good and evil is implying like we're knowing stuff now. We've got brains happening.
Big brain energy. So I guess then my next question is they didn't have any knowledge of good and evil before. And some people may call this the original sin. But was it a sin at all if you don't know the difference between good and evil?
Yeah. So original sin is a doctrine that was created in, I want to say like third, fourth century CE. Um, I don't know. I'm no theologian, so I'm not gonna like be an expert on this type of thing. But like this is why in Judaism, like you have no original sin. Like this is a strictly Christian creation. Um, so yeah, I don't see any evidence of original sin happening here. And original sin, the idea that this explains why Cain and Abel were bad because it's passed down from generation to generation to generation. I don't think that's what's happening here, at least through the biblical text itself. If you want to throw in some theology to it, sure, go for it. But if we're just, figuring out what the authors themselves meant,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be, indicative of original sin. And, I will say I was introduced to this idea through Benjamin Sommer's book, the God and his bodies in ancient Israel, something along the lines of that. I don't think this is his idea, but this is where I was introduced to it. That if Adam and Eve don't have knowledge of good and bad yet, how could one of their actions be a sin? Like, and so that's the question that's kind of pervading this. Like, if it was this a sin? Did they sin? Um, if you don't have the agency to be able to sin,
Mm.
so I think that's something to consider. I don't know how much stock I take into it, but I think it's a really good point, and it brings up so many questions. Like like Genesis, there's just so much to talk about here. It's so exciting. Um, but like the other thing that he argues in that book is like what we clearly have here, if we're just doing a surface reading, is like, oh no, this is bad. We're getting kicked out. Oh no, no, bad. Ah. But what I was introduced through this book is this idea that maybe this isn't actually a banishment. Like as we see in chapter 2, like Adam was made or the human was made to like work and till the ground. And that can't happen until Adam gets exiled from the garden. Because the garden is like, this paradise type place. And as we see in, the punishment of man, that he's banished from the garden to work until the ground. Like he's fulfilling his purpose, like through this banishment. And we see that through the woman too. Like she's here to like give life, like Hava. She's like that's what her name means, and that's like how this immortality is created through giving life. And you're not getting that in the Garden of Eden. Like these people can't fulfill their roles until they're exiled from Eden. So in that sense, there's this idea that maybe we're not really being exiled from the garden, but really humanity is being put into where they can actually fulfill their roles.
So like a baby bird being kicked out of the nest, or then some tribal communities, they will send their like young men out at 13 or whatever age to go out for a certain length of time and then come back. I just another like passage of showing that you've aged, that you're
Yeah,
coming into this, your purpose.
yeah. No, it's really like emphasizing that humanity is growing up, and now we're doing what we're doing now. This is making sense of, oh, okay, I'm doing what I was made to do, and that that paradise, that garden, that Eden, like it's this idealized place. Like I think at one point, like, to quote Sommers, um, he says, "Paradise is a womb or a tomb, but it is not a place to live." And I think that's an interesting concept of like, and we're diving into philosophy here, which isn't what the author was writing about. Like we've left the historical critical analysis here. My bad.
I'm
But
not sure I was ever there, but I'm trying my hardest.
sure.
Because
But
as Willy Wonka would say,
tie it all back. Good job.
tie it all back. Um, no, it's very cool because you read this and you see things you can identify in other cultures and in other religions. And it's very sad that I feel like this part of scripture has been used to as a weapon
Mhm.
to downplay women and to downplay a lot of things. Sorry, I'll get very emotional if I talk about it because
Sure.
it's very frustrating people using the Bible to justify why they want the world to look a certain way. But that's
Mhm.
not what this text is saying at all.
Yeah, yeah. No, it can be really frustrating when people, quote the Bible, but what they're really doing is quoting their own interpretation. Um, so I think, and this is why I love, the historical critical analysis of the Bible, because we're trying to figure out what what the authors were saying, what the historical context and all that stuff is. And I think that's a whole lot more fascinating and can be a whole lot more compelling for religious people than just, using it to get whatever you want, whatever power, whatever policy. But yeah, it's fascinating.
The election's so close. I'm like, let it all out, Jody. Just
Yeah.
let it all out. No. Um, but yeah. So, but this is giving definition to life and roles, and it's twisted into something else sometimes. And
Mhm.
uh, well, I truly love the story of Dustin and Olivia.
Yeah, Dustin and Olivia doing their thing, and they're doing it well.
They and Harold, Justice for Harold, 2024. Oh,
Yeah.
oh wait.
Yeah.
Okay,
Do we have
quick.
any other
Yeah, they don't mention bugs. I'm sorry. I've just
bugs?
been noticing bugs don't get a whole lot of mention in this. And I know that the bug representation really goes up during Moses's time with the
Yeah.
locusts. Um, but I just very much I think a good way to know that this is not literal in any sense is there was no bug bites mentioned.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people need to keep that in mind.
Yeah. We get bugs in Genesis 1 with the creeping, crawling things, but
Oh, okay.
um,
I didn't interpret that. I
yeah.
was thinking of Harold.
Harold. Yeah, Harold. Freaking Harold.
Freaking
Uh,
Harold.
but yeah, interesting guy, Harold. Misunderstood guy, I'd
Listen,
say.
he didn't lie. I feel like we should have a different hand signal, like justice for Harold.
Justice for Harold. Yeah.
Justice for Harold.
Uh,
Well, this has been the Religious Treehouse.
yeah. What a good time.
Thank you for joining us. If this was your first time watching, welcome. If you're a repeat offender, welcome back. You can find us on Twitter. I'm not going to call it the other thing. Instagram, TikTok. If you can figure out who's tweeting what, congratulations. You've learned us so well.
Yeah, we're Religious Treehouse on most platforms, I think. I know on Twitter we're the Rel Treehouse because Twitter only lets our usernames be so many letters long. But follow us there. I'm having a good time on Twitter.
You're killing
As
it.
good as I have, yeah.
Twitter is the Wild West, and Matthew is its sheriff.
Amen. All right. Thanks all. We'll see you next time.